Good evening. You are listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you, of course, from the Xtreme Studios, just west of Orlando, Florida, in the Pinehurst Palace. I have on board with me the young 20-something Professor Pixel, who's watching Diner 1982 with us for the very first time. Of course, I've got a very special guest star, Easy E. Eric Breen, the eldest gentleman here on the panel, although it's close. A fan favorite here, of course, who wanted to hop on board because I'm sure he's going to have some interesting takes on this movie. And of course, I've got RDV, who guests with me all the time, Tuesday nights, primarily on all our action and 80s based type movies that we do.
I
here
just
on
got back from the diner, actually. I had a couple cigarettes, I had a coffee, hang out with the boys.
I gotta say this: I miss smoking, especially on film,
Indoors.
and cigars and the whole upscale lifestyle. But with Diner, I gotta start. I'm going to start with everybody, Eric, except I'm going to have you go last because based on what they say, it's going to be interesting to see the contrast, maybe what you're going to say. But I'll go first and then go to RDV and then Pixel. For Diner 1982, I believe, it's an all-star cast. I think the movie's a very good movie with some great scenes in it. I think it's a nice little snapshot of coming of age in the late 20s, in the late 50s, as it were. As far as a period piece, watching it, all that's beautifully shot with the stuff on the outside and the clothes and everything, too. You don't really have this kind of social thing going on anymore. But I have to say this about Diner. While it may have changed the way people show characters like Quentin Tarantino, hey, here's characters just doing what they do. It's not a film that I would sit there and say, oh, I'm going to watch it a second time or a third time because it's a lot of fun. It's good. It's interesting, but it's just sort of there. And it's just a bunch of people, as Seinfeld would say, kind of really not doing anything. But it's still damn good. And I forgot how good it was, especially Mickey Rourke and everybody else in it and the types of the characters that they played, because they're not playing a specific character, in my opinion. RDV, was this a first watch for you? What's your initial take?
First watch for me, and this, like I said, this movie is kind of like a coming of age movie. These guys know each other from growing up. One of them was already married, one's getting married. He's kind of have cold feet. The other guy's getting into into the debt. It's very Stand By Me in that sense for me. And that's so Mickey Rourke. Seeing him without his face so messed up is always a pleasure.
It's pretty.
Because we're talking behind the stage. I was talking about how Kevin Bacon. I've never seen this side of Kevin Bacon before. I'm like, why don't we have more of this? Maybe Stir Echoes is probably the closest you're going to get to that. But it's seeing Paul Reiser in here. Playing the guy. He doesn't want to ask, but he's like, if you're going that way, if you're gonna have that sandwich, I'll eat that. Eat the sandwich. If you're not having it though, and him and Steve Guttenberg playing off each other. It's like I just love that they're the whole entire film. Daniel Stern, and he's gonna have problems with his wife
as the mature one.
yeah, it's the mature one. So I'm thinking Bushwhacked, or I'm thinking Home Alone. That's or City Slickers. That's the Stern I know. Seeing me in more of a mature setting, it's like, wow, what the heck. But I love what he says about the whole thing being marriage. It's like, do it my marriage? It's like, well, I love my life. It's like, but we don't have anything really much in common. Like as far as, as far as talking, I can't talk to her. Like I could bullshit to you guys for hours, but when it comes to her, it's like, I can't. It's like, and he says, it's like, it's funny how when you're dating a girl, you're trying to have the sex, or plan it out when your parents are gone or stuff. But he's like, it's weird when you get married. Now it's like you can have it all you want, but it's just not the same. And I love that little advice he gives. It kind of like he said, you know what? Fuck it. We'll always have the diner. No matter what happens in life. And I thought that was kind of cool. And I'm plus I'll get nostalgic because there's a lot of stuff in this movie you don't see anymore.
Yeah.
Especially those kind of diners like that, or even the cars in general. Having the guys dressing up in the nice suits, having the coat racks in the diner.
Yes.
I've never seen that in my life, in my time.
Yes.
Eric, I remember you're a little older than us. I'm sure when you've grown up, you've probably seen some of that stuff in the diners, having the coat racks at least, maybe, or seeing the cigarette vending machines,
Oh, those I remember.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's when he started.
Now, Pixel, let's go to you here. You're the young 20-something here. Do you know what a coat rack is?
What a coat rack is?
That was the question. That was the joke, yes. People would wear coats when they'd go out in public and they'd hang them up while they're sitting down. Okay, I'm messing with you. This, I think, was the first take for you. Did you know anything about this film before you watched it?
No, I didn't realize I knew half the people in this because I I think RDV is right. The most that I can speak to it. They are in an element that I'm definitely not used to seeing them in. But they aren't bad in it at all. I think they each have their strength and they play to it. So yeah,
It's very much a buddy movie in the sense that it's like we've all had a group of friends we hung out with, and at least we're new people that were close, guys, being guys, and it's that time, So I said I really love this kind of movie, this kind of setting, and it doesn't have to be a big action blockbuster movie. It doesn't have to be anything or a high budget.
No,
It's very much just like you said, guys just going to have coffee, and then life happens around the diner.
Now, Eric, you've joined us occasionally on some of the more older classic type films there, and you gave us our perspective on a lot of that too here. I'm curious because obviously you've seen the film, you've got very strong opinions about it. Before you dive into those, or maybe because of those, that's why you wanted to come on. I was curious as why you wanted to join in and what your initial take on this film is, why it's that good of a film.
Well, okay, first, I just want to start with it. This is my brother's favorite movie of all time.
Okay.
And this came up a couple of weeks ago. We were talking. I brought it up for some reason. I can't even remember why now. And I think that kind of planted the seed to maybe do this tonight.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the movie goes, for me, it's more like it represents a group of friends that have been friends for years. And they're all at kind of like the crossroads between the end of adolescence and the beginning of adulthood. A few of them are already there with, like I said, Shrevey is married to Beth.
Mm-hmm.
Mickey Rourke his character Boog has kind of been in the adult world to the point to where he's got a job, career, whatever, and he's got a gambling problem. You've got Eddie, who's getting married, provided his wife can pass the football test.
Yep.
140 questions.
You've got Billy, who's moved on but comes back for the holidays and to be Eddie's best man. He's got problems of his own at the moment, as we find out as the movie progresses. That a woman he'd been friends with for years, they got together for one night and now she's pregnant and he wants to marry her. She doesn't want to marry him.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you got, like I said, if you're of a certain age, there's somebody in that group you can identify with. Like I said, Fenwick. He obviously comes from money, but he's on his own because he's pretty much been cut off from the majority of his money, and he's got he's on the precipice of having a real drinking problem. So they're different. They're all at different stages of their lives, and they know this is kind of the end because the next year or so they're all going to start going their separate ways. I mean, they're always going to be friends, but it's like where they're going. The only one that really doesn't have something that he's on the brink of is Modell. He's just kind of there, and every group has that guy too. So it's like if you had a group of friends in a day and age where you weren't all uber connected with these things and whatnot, there's somebody that everybody can identify with, and I think that's what makes this movie so well done. It's the dialogue is, to me, impeccable. You're right. I mean, one way to look at it is, it's a bunch of guys not really doing a whole lot. But on the other hand, if you could also say they're all doing a hell of a lot because their lives are all about to face major turning points.
Yeah, and I think that for me, I'm gonna talk about an idea here that I haven't really brought up a lot when it comes to movies, and then I'm going to say this is kind of not like that, and I'll go to the real idea of what I think this movie is, and we'll see if you agree with me on that because of the age thing here. Is that there's this idea, like if I take like English movies, for example, fantasy films, we've talked about here on the Xtreme Movie Show, we've talked about goofy ass ones, B-level shit ones, sword and sorcery sort of stuff, and good ones, right? You take somebody that might be a bit more of a free thinker, like a Michael Moorcock of the Elric series, and he had this idea of 3 or 4 different warriors with their own stories and all that, but they're like different facets of the same thing. You kind of put them all together, and it's like a multiverse kind of attitude. And that comes from quantum physics, right? It was a sexy thing to talk about in the 60s. Then you take somebody that, and God forbid I bring this name up, especially with Amazon and on everybody that seemed to allegedly love it, and that would be Tolkien, who wrote very Christian story in Lord of the Rings, where the good guys beat the bad guys and they lived happily ever after, and that's it. So it's very juvenile in that approach, as opposed to maybe the more adult level multiverse, different sides of the coin sort of thing. So it just depends on what you like. This movie, I think that what's interesting to me is, again, and it's been brought up in its own way by everybody here, that when you're in a group of guys, you're kind of probably just one of those guys, but at some stage in your life you're probably maybe a little bit more of this guy, but then now you're going to be that guy or whatever. Like I say, it was kind of funny to see Daniel Stern as the guy that's actually married and talking about his wife. And RDB, you brought that point up here too. But here's what I think the movie is really about. I'm not trying to blow everybody away with this, but I thought it was pretty apparent. This is a movie that was shot basically in the supposedly in the late 50s, and they're arguing early on. I like how they're shot really close too. That gives us a feeling of being really close to each other. You feel like you're sitting down at the table. They're arguing about the superiority between Sinatra and Johnny Mathis. And it's true. You could probably argue that Sinatra might technically be the better singer for certain technical reasons. And he's awesome. Don't get me wrong. I love Sinatra. But if you're going to be getting down with the ladies, you're listening to Johnny Mathis, because he's a friggin' crooner, not in the same way that he was.
I disagree.
Well, but here's the point. Here's the point. You don't listen to what you want, you listen to what the woman wants, because that's what's going to get you. And so what this movie is about, honestly, it's about, I think, all these male stereotypes in the 50s that don't know how to do anything. So I think it's almost kind of like a pro-feminist movie, because all the problems they have, they're juveniles in their early to mid-20s,
yes.
Right? They don't know how to handle problems, despite the fact they've known each other for a long period of time and they're sitting down doing it. I've never met or seen on television, I can't say that's really true, but I was shocked at the fact that normally at that age you were growing up a lot quicker with a lot more responsibilities, and you could argue that they were. But I thought, wow, these guys are a bunch of boobs. They don't know what the hell they're doing. And it was amazing to me, because they did have strong women in their lives that they didn't seem to know how to handle. I thought, there's no way in hell these kind of women would beat these guys, especially the older one that came back and has the one that works in the TV studio. And then, of course, when Daniel Stern's having the big argument with his wife about, hey, these records are important to me, and we're supposed to go, oh, yeah, he's supposed to be assertive with his wife to say what's important to him. And she's like, who gives a shit what's on the B side of these? I mean, it's like, that was a pretty powerful piece too. I mean, and it really struck me that these are probably the roles that men were thought of from the 50s going to the 60s, before you had the free love thing and all the different stereotypes that would change over the years. And I thought that's what this movie was more about, rather than just, one guy's a ladies' man, one guy's this, one guy's that. I thought that was too easy.
The most intense argument was it was Steve Gertberg and his mother. He's got the knife. All he wanted is a hot sandwich,
Right. Yeah. Demand what 20-something year old man demands his mom make a sandwich that way?
But she admitted it in the end, though.
Now, you're talking about the thing with Shrevey and Beth.
Yeah.
Was to illustrate kind of the point later in the movie where he goes, we can sit here and bullshit all night, but I can't have a 10-minute conversation with Beth, because it was illustrated in the pick a record, any record, I'll tell you what's on the B-side, blah, blah. And she goes, I just want to hear the music. And then it was, well, who gives a shit? And he goes, I do. And then when he storms out and tells her what he was placing, it's kind of that you marry, I said, it's almost, you married a woman because you can't marry one of your friends, because this wasn't that era. And it was just so obvious that there was, that they didn't have anything in common, because they hadn't grown up yet. And I think when you get to the end of the movie, where you start to see the growth in their relationship, when he suggests that the 10-day vacation, and you realize, they're probably going to make it, because and I love the part about how she had dated Boog earlier in life, and so when Boog needed to win a bet, the lengths he was almost willing to go to, when he has her, pretend to be the girl's name that I always forget from the movie theater, which was one of the funnier scenes in the movie, obviously.
A lot
But
of people were triggered by that, though. You know why?
It was just
well,
popcorn, sir.
they weren't they weren't 40 years ago because people had a sense of humor 40 years ago.
I know.
And you know, and something else she said also, he said all-star cast. You got to remember at the time that was a cast full of unknowns. The only one that really people knew was Kevin Bacon because he'd been trampled in Animal House and murdered in Friday the 13th.
I was gonna say
That's
like
right.
The rest of these guys were virtual unknowns.
I was gonna
And-
say because people upset about that. It's like, did they not see the Animal House that came out? Like, which is like 10 times worse than this movie.
Well, again, like I said, that was different because I mean I was around for those. I mean I saw Animal House
Yeah.
in the theater. You know, people are. Yeah, this is a movie that, yeah, and there's not a whole lot that people could have a problem with today, but that would have been one of them because, like I said, people are.
To me though, it was a story Mickey tells her at the end. How he goes, oh, I couldn't help it. Like, I just wanted to let it.
Carol Heathrow. Damn, how.
And the fact that they mentioned early more in the movie when he made the bet is that this girl's kind of a ditz. They'd heard, one of them had heard she's kind of ditz. So he's like, of course, this plays in the act because you think like, she walks out, she screams, she goes into the bathroom. He goes, and he gives her this bullshit line, and then she starts to buy it, and I'm like,
well, of course, that's
because she's
the thing, though. But that's just it. Because I said it's there were guys that were getting away with that stuff. They probably still are today. But that's I mean that's a minor part of the movie.
No,
Now, Rob, tell me if you. To me, I think for good or ill, Joss Whedon took some inspiration from this kind of writing style because the dialogue is rapid fire. It's very conversational, and maybe he learned some of the wrong lessons, or maybe people at post Whedon learned the wrong lessons. But I just thought one of the strengths of this movie was just the way it flowed conversationally, because there's really, in a movie that seems like it's full of wasted dialogue, there really isn't any. I mean, it kind of all fits when
Yeah, I agree with you though. The whole bit about the roast beef sandwich, that's the most stupidest dialogue I ever read, but I was buying every minute
it's
of it.
real life.
It felt real. It felt
Everybody
like
had that friend.
Yeah.
You going to finish that? I mean, we all know. Again, if you're of a certain age, I knew people like that.
Yeah, it's like, well, you going this way? Like, well, if you're not going that way, don't worry about it. He's like, do you want to ride? He's like, well, I don't know if you're going that way. It's like, yeah, and that's every one of these characters is real.
It makes me wonder how much of what was there scripted versus, hey, these are the main key talking points. I want you to cut your guys' promos. We'll play off of each other so we can capture some of the authenticity on screen. Because I tell you, the friend that's just sort of there, that's usually a weird dude, and not in a good way. Then the guy that's passive aggressive like that is usually a bitch in some way. As you get older, you're a little more cynical about these things. So I thought the real strength of it was when the people were dealing with relationships with women. And yeah, there's a lot of talking about chasing women and having sex, which of course is universal. But I thought that for guys in their 20s that were not bad looking at all and had actually respectable middle to upper class livelihoods, that it seemed so alien and foreign to them how to score with chicks. I was a little surprised by that. And the other thing about about it too is I always heard about Mickey Rourke when I was younger. Of course, I didn't really get to know him until he was older and stuff. But seeing him here and just how pretty he was, he has got a much softer voice. He's got that natural kind of way as a hairdresser, but not effeminate, where he understands women. He's around them all day, so he uses that to his advantage. There's nothing wrong with that. But yet he seems.
I was gonna say the way he reminds you of, he's kind of like Dylan on 90210 in a sense. He's not like the tough spoken guy. He's kind of soft spoken. He's kind of the sweet charmer guy, and he plays to that. But he's not. Yeah. But he's not a creep though. Like you expect in most movies, but he's actually like a decent guy. It's just that he's got a gambling addiction.
Well, and with the group itself, you can tell that Boog has kind of separated himself from the rest of them. He's kind of like on the outskirts of them now. You can tell he's had by far the most success with girls. As we find out that Eddie's a virgin.
Yeah.
And his wife will be his first. Billy, you kind of get the feeling has been around a little bit, and but this woman, his friend, he's always harbored stronger feelings maybe than
Yep.
she has. And Fenwick, you don't know, because I mean I love that part. He goes, how'd it go with Beth? She never wants to see me again.
I gotta say though,
but hang on a second.
yeah, go ahead.
And again, the only person you don't know about is Modell, because I said, and I think that was probably by design. He's just kind of there, and he's like, again, but we all, if you had a group of friends, a close knit group of friends that you've gone through life with, they all, like I said, Eddie's a virgin, but Boog is legitimately surprised because I said it's you don't. It's not something when you're getting it, you shout it from the rooftops. When you're not, you just kind of low key about it and hope nobody notices. And maybe Eddie had kind of just like fooled everybody up to that point. Because if anybody would know, it would have been Boog. Because I said he's far away the most worldly of the bunch.
Yeah.
Well, you would know that the old expression is that guys get together and we're not around women. What are they doing? Well, they're talking about how to get women. I think, unfortunately, one aspect that's never discussed in films, and I don't mean this from the female perspective about relationships, listening, and all that crap that they say works, but from the man's perspective, you know, okay, what do you do once you get it? It's that whole Hollywood idea of, you're going to get married, so you're going to live happily ever after, and then it's like after you get married and you walk down the aisle, then what? And we all know how things change. And RDV, you'd mentioned earlier about how, yeah, he makes the comment in the movie about, yeah, we're always trying to get with a woman and having sex, and all our conversations revolved around all that. And now that you can have it at any time, it's just different. I can't talk to her. Well, the implication here is that somehow, you're responsible for having to talk to her, like you got to do that or something. And it's like, you don't. You can have things in common, but back then, the idea is, you married pretty soon on, and you did everything for it. So it was kind of shocking to me that it was taking more of the turn of, well, how do we listen to these women and their needs? Because I'm telling you, I don't think that was really the vibe back then in the 50s. It's like, I'm the man, I'm going to lead, you're going to follow, shut up.
So,
And I'm not saying that's right or it's wrong. I'm simply saying that that's what surprised me about this movie, is that they seem like they had the toughest time with what would be considered, decent women here. The so-called blonde dits in the movie theater and all that too. There was always a girl that was like that, but at the same time too, it's not like wasn't the first time she hadn't been out on a date like that where somebody tried to score with her. She'd had a reputation. So I found it very interesting how they really kind of put women on a pedestal in this film, and the guys really seemed incapable of figuring out and learning, especially at their age. Now, Pix, I was going to ask you, because as I always like to point out, you're the young 20-something on the show, so you give that younger person's perspective to everything. Do you think that people in your age bracket just get together and hang out like after a movie without cell phones and just sit there and talk the night away and figure things out? Or does that not really happen that much anymore?
I mean, I'm an odd duck.
I'm not asking you.
I'm not.
I'm talking your generation. You're around them a lot more than we are.
I think there's a good portion of them that do hang out. They like hanging out if it's after like a quick summer job, or if it's after school. I think there are people that still like to hang out. I think that's just a core that can't be like taken from society.
You're talking about how to get some.
It could be that. It could be it could be anything.
I know it could be anything. I'm asking you, just do you think people see the idea here is that the 70s, and Eric backed me up on this or not, the 70s was the peak for men and women saying, hey, what's going on? Hey, not much. Let's go back to my place. All right, let's do it. Let's have a good time. The 80s is fun, but ever since then, there's been a dramatic decline in men and women getting busy, generally speaking, and at a later age in life and everything, for better, for worse. That's just the stats, if you believe in that sort of thing. So to me, I know when I go to my gym and I'm working out, we're resting between sets and all that, and there's 5 or 6 of us standing around at our racks and all that. I look around, every single person's got their phone on and earphones. Nobody's talking, nobody's communicating. And these are guys probably like in their 30s and 40s. So I can only imagine what it's like when I go to, everywhere I see cell phones with people and all that. I'm like, you really can't kind of communicate and talk and have these discussions in today's world.
I
So
want to point out a few things. Well, first we'll talk about you just asked Pixel. There's a lot of people that, especially my age, or even when back in the early 2000s, that would go out to George Webb or Denny's, hang out. People just sit there,
Yep.
you just have coffee, and you hang out. You couldn't smoke inside the building anymore because it kind of sucks. But it's probably healthier for you, I guess. But if you're already smoking, what's the point?
Smoking
the other,
goes good with talking,
but
drinking, and eating.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
why.
So the other two things I want to point out in the movie. One, I was really surprised to hear is that the girl, when Billy, if that's what his name is, he's the one who comes out of town. He's got the girl, he's knocked up, he's talking to her, and she's like, don't worry, I'm not gonna do anything crazy like having aborted. I'm like, that's refreshing to hear because he says like, I feel like I don't have a say in this, and usually, it's like I want to be a dad, so usually that's not the case. The guy doesn't have a say. So it was kind of refreshing to hear. And I guess it has to do along with the decade of the movie. It was considered more of a sin to have an abortion. It was really frowned upon.
And
And
she
the
was the one in the most
church.
high profile job.
Yeah. So that was kind of cool to hear. The other thing was with is they mentioned Eddie mentions like it's like, well, I've been dating for 5 years. How girls are, they want to have a make something to make sure it's official. I'm thinking 5 years. I'm like I'm like, I didn't think that was a thing back then. Because I thought that was more of a now today's standard where people just slack up and just live together for 6 or 7 years. My buddy who just got married, I wasn't in a wedding. He 6.5 years dated her, finally got married.
It's not a knock on anybody specifically, but back then the standard was you did not live with somebody until you were engaged at the minimum or are getting married, because back then people knew that if you lived with somebody before you married them, it wasn't going to work because the old expression is why buy the cow when the milk is so cheap, and it's you can argue whether you believe in that or not, and whether it's a religious thing or not, but that seems to be the case. But you're right. Who's going to wait around for 5 years? I
5
mean,
years. And I was like, this decade, I'm like, that's a stretch. She must just go ahead.
No, it's a couple of things. You gotta remember in the 50s, there were far more intact families,
absolutely.
and you were raised a certain way. So dating 5 years may have consisted of a Friday night date here, maybe some kind of picnic with with your girlfriend's family there, but not like it would be today because there were certain rules that had to be followed. I mean, curfews were adhered to, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was a completely different world because when I saw that again most recently, I said, "Wow, it does seem kind of weird." I go, "No, you got to remember the time. This would have been 1954 through 1959. So yeah, it was an entirely different world."
It just
You
blows my
met
mind.
the parents. You almost have to ask for permission. Hey, I'd like to take your daughter out.
Sure.
Blah blah blah.
Yeah,
God help you if you're late.
Yeah. But I mean, like back then, okay, yeah. But today, I've and when a couple people are like you're doing that, 5 or 6 years dating, it's just like I used to work with a couple people. They dated for 7 years, got married, divorced, buddy, and less than a year later.
But you could see in those days how you could date for 5 years and still haven't done it. Because you may have had 5 actual minutes of alone time in that time.
Sure. Well, because you don't have your own place. You were constantly working or going to school. And same with her. She was was either heavily involved with her family or either working for her family's establishment or whatever. It's like going to school too. It's like I mean, there's a lot of stuff involved, but like you think that mindset would be gone today because you think with everything. Because look, you can talk to anybody in any country if you want to, in court if you want to. I don't really call it courting; it's online. But I mean, no offense, Pixel, but I mean like communication is much more easier to communicate with a girl and a guy than it was back then. Back then, you had to show up in person, or you rang the phone and their dad would hang up. Yeah, it's good. Now kids have cell phones, iPads.
And another thing you talk about the closeness of the group. I mean, like the being at the diner all the time, et cetera, et cetera.
They're like brothers.
It's so much easier to be alone today and fill the time than it was back then when you basically had the movies, the radio, and a television that got a couple of channels on a good day. So there wasn't as much to do. So when you
Drive
had a
in.
group of friends, you
Yeah.
definitely spent more time together because, as I said, there wasn't a whole lot. You saw the guys, when Billy shows up at Eddie's room. Like I said,
Yep.
now, there's no computer sitting on the desk. There's no TV.
No.
I don't even know if there's a radio in the room. So I said, I mean, there was way more interpersonal communication in those days, which led to, like I said, that's what made the dialogue between the friends. Like, it just felt so natural because you talked about everything because I said, that's a lot of times that's all you had.
Right. Yeah.
Well, even though it may be easier to talk or communicate, I think the communication's worse because the real magic happens in person. And that's one of the best things about, I think, this in terms of the movie, going back to the beginning, is that you're in a situation where the opening shot where you see him going into the party and the camera's trying to follow him around and all that, you had a lot more civic functions that would encourage people to interact socially, like at dances and clubs and those things that you don't have today. And you get churches, obviously, a lot more of a bigger role in the household, generally speaking, back then than it is today. I think there's no arguing that. So to me, when these guys sit down, guys, we all prize loyalty pretty much over, for the most part, anything. And you definitely see that they have with each other, despite the fact that they don't understand how this person's like this or that. They're trying to figure it out with themselves. But again, it still struck me as pretty interesting because, again, as much time as they may have had with their significant other, whether it was dating or being married, that they just haven't learned anything, I thought was pretty telling because, you could sit there and text, you could sit there and call, you can do whatever, but within 30 seconds, a minute, across from somebody, if they're going to be a part of your life in the future or the potential to be. And that's not just marriage. That means even for, a one night stand or an affair or whatever. And that was not absent back in those times. It was just more, for better or for worse, it was more socially discouraged that you would be so presumptuous about it, especially with the way you would dress and talk and everything too. So it's not like it wasn't there. And that's why, even though the guys were talking about chasing tail and all that, it's perfectly believable, red-blooded males in their early 20s at their peak. It was just interesting because they seemed so lost about becoming a man, which I thought back then most guys would be really eager and looking forward to going, man, I can't wait to go out. It's post-World War. It's boom time. Let's go find a job. Let me go work for this person or that. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in this film, because it does. So again, it just struck me. They seem more like 16, 17-year-olds rather than college-age kids.
Yeah. Did they ever say where this takes place? Because I'm thinking
Baltimore.
Baltimore. Okay. Because I was thinking and seeing the farms and this is Wisconsin. The girl on the horse.
Look, remember the test that Eddie gives his prospective bride? It's a Colts test.
Oh yeah.
Not Indy kids, Baltimore. Look it up. And Barry Levinson is from the area. That's why he was able to. It felt so authentic because he ended up writing and directing episodes of Homicide, which is also set in Baltimore. So that's kind of his wheelhouse. So it's
yeah, I like that. Boob or Ricky Rourke's character, Boob. It's called Boog. Okay, it's something saying boob before. I was like threw me off. So
the boob.
Him and Kevin Bacon in the car, and they're driving down, just cruising around, having fun because she's this hot blonde on the horse up there. And he goes over, he just speed up. He's like, hey, he pulls over, he starts talking to her, and he's like, hey, it's a nice horse. He's like, you ever ride Western? She's like, oh, I prefer English. They're easy to control. It's like, and I love how he's like, I think she just gave me a fake name.
she represents the life that he wants,
yes,
but doesn't think he can have.
Yep.
And that's because his growth in the movie, I said, from getting beat up by the loan shark, and then when the friend of his father's ends up bailing him out and having him go to work for him. I love the scene where he gut punches the guy. He goes, I owed you that. And then you realize, because she's his date for the wedding. So he, when he went the second time, they connected, and so you get the feeling that he's going to be okay. And that's something. As the movie progresses, a different movie, maybe one of the members of the group has something tragic happen to him. But this really wasn't that kind of movie, because there's plenty of movies like that.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody kind of gets either a happy ending or you get the feeling that they're all going to be okay. And
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Like, I was trying to compare it to Stand By Me a little bit, because that's the only one I can think of where you have a group of friends together, and then they tell you what happens then towards the end. Obviously one of them dies. But I mean, like, it's just one guy's point of view. It's like these are my buddies hanging out with. And it's another movie you can identify with, hanging out with. So like I said, I this was actually a good movie. Thank you for recommending. I've never seen this before. As a first time watch for me. Billy just going up randomly punching people because of a baseball game.
I was hoping, because when I was talking to my brother about this, I go, that's the scene that got my friend interested in watching the movie. I go, hope he's not disappointed when he realizes that that's just a scene, but it's just like one of those oddball things that they put in the movie to just add a little bit of color, just like the name I chose today, the guy that eats the left side of the menu. I mean, when they follow him out, this guy's going, "All right, Earl."
Earl, right? So he's got the tiniest car too on top of it. But that's that scene. I love how it also shows how Daniel Stern's wife, she's falling behind the guys, and she's yelling at him, "Hey, who's this? Who's this?" And he's ignoring her, and it shows you how much a dick this guy is to his wife, And obviously, it was the first time we see kind of strife between them a little bit. He's kind of being a little jerk. But yeah. So when he heard, he's like, I love how he explains. He's like, "Wow, the baseball team, this because of a mistake, they got a fight, and then the whole team got involved." So he's like, I believe that's number 7.
And 8. She doesn't get it. It's like, that's stupid. Because in some ways, Beth is the smartest person in the group because she's just got a way of cutting through all the clutter to get to, like I said, it's what's just important. Music. That's dumb. And it's like, like I said, it's, I think that, like I said, every character in this movie fits like a perfect jigsaw puzzle to me. Now, I said it's in my all-time top 10. So I mean, I'm sure I'm overhyping it more than anybody else here, but I just loved it.
I can relate to Beth being a real character. That's my friend's old wife. It's kind of like that. When we talk, and she hears about the stupid shit that we did when we were younger, she's like, "What the hell are you doing?" He's like, he's just like, he had to been there. It's something that we guys do. It's like I can't explain it more.
Well, they don't have to understand why guys do what we do, just like we don't have to understand what they do. I mean,
exactly.
Nice, but the point is, if you can't use it for something, what does it amount to? And she's basically telling him the important thing is that we hear music. And he's like, but it's important to me, and yet he fails to tell her why. And that's why I'm saying there's several examples in this movie of where the women are like 2 steps ahead of the guys. And I'm like, that's a young Ellen, is it Burstein? What's her name? Barkin. And I'm like, well, she dresses up like a 50s lady pretty damn well. And I'm like, bro, you out-achieved yourself there in marrying that. And to even point out Mickey Rourke's character, even though he knows women at a certain level, I was wondering if the whole equestrian lady was either the rich bitch who likes to do a little bit of slumming because she's got daddy issues, or 2, testing him because he's like, do you like to ride Western or Eastern? That's an obvious sexual reference there. But the point is he's communicating to her that he's a bit of a cultured individual, which we kind of don't see, even though we hear that he is a beautician by day, a law school guy at night or whatever. And then, of course, at the end when they start riding off and he's the date, I thought, wow, that's way too easy, because somebody that comes from money and a well-to-do family, and I don't mean instant millionaires or whatever like that, I mean old money, a lot of that stuff is a lot more range. So for him to be able to cajole her somehow into it, while it makes for a nice happy ending, it seemed a bit artificial to me.
Well, again, it's a movie versus a series where there's not time to develop. You just have to assume that they filled in some of the blanks off camera. And I was also getting back to the music thing for a second. It's not to say that Shrevey is wrong or that she's right, but it's just that what's important to you may not be important to me. And that doesn't make either one of us right or wrong. It just makes it what it is. And that's where compromise comes in. And you get the feeling this is also like there was probably a time when the man didn't feel like he needed to compromise.
Exactly.
And now we're getting to the point to where that's changing. So that's another thing I said. If you watch if you guys watch the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, you see a lot of that as that show develops.
It's also relatable too, because like you're gonna find someone who doesn't think, oh, it's not really important, like and you just ask something, like, you just put it back to where you found it from. It's like, and she's like, I just respect that. But then I love how he brings it back. He's like, it's like, dude, this is my hobby though. I love music. I love knowing everything about it. And he's like, and he's like, and then he names the song when he first saw her.
Yeah. And I think that probably, if she doesn't show it in that scene, it probably resonates, because it's like, okay, it's never going to be as important to me, but I kind of get an idea why it may be important to you. And again, like I said, when that movie ended, I got the feeling that they're going to be okay too.
Yep.
So it's like I said, it's you kind of, in movies like this, you kind of decide. You can decide for yourself. Are they all going to make it? And if you want to believe, yeah, they do. I mean, to me, it's like.
Yeah, the last thing I think we should all kind of talk about here before we close up is, and I'll start off with RDV, because it's more apparent, I think, with our age, what I'm about to say. RDV, we mentioned this backstage briefly, and Pix, I know you just came in. It may have been mentioned right when you came in. The impact of just letting people talk, character-wise, and you mentioned the Josh Whedon effect and all that too, and I'd certainly say that that's a very good comparison. But I mean, I would even say so far as Quentin Tarantino, where they just let people just talk and ramble about whatever the hell they want, just so you get to know all them before shit happens and all that too. To give your opinion on how big this movie was in terms of telling a story, the way you would do it in a movie that didn't exist before it.
Well, I said a lot of movies before this. I can't really compare it, because as far as the diner part, but I mean, I'll just say having the dialogue and just like I said, it didn't really matter what they're saying. It's the fact that you got this sense that these guys were actually knew somebody. They actually were real people, knew each other, hung out and stuff, even if they just met the night before. They felt these. This is, like I said, this is incredible acting. Incredible dialogue, script writing, and it just felt like as Eric pointed out, you could be any one of these guys in there. Everyone has a relatable character. They all go through their own hardships. Some come back. A lot of them come back and mature throughout the movie. Other ones you don't know what's happening, but you have this sense. If you ever watch the characters grow up, they actually are off. They're not. They're well. But overall, this movie kind of reminds me. You brought up Seinfeld earlier, Rob. Mm-hmm. Seinfeld was pretty much based on real life friends.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder, it's like, did he get the inspiration for doing something like show like that? Maybe he had seen this movie beforehand, prior. It's only so many years ago before Seinfeld started.
Yeah, he was a comic going on Carson. This was actually even before Paul Reiser was really a big time comic too. So it's kind of prescient what all these people would end up doing.
But I mean, like I said, this is a movie and a lot of us can relate to before internet stuff. I kind of miss this camaraderie and stuff. Now everybody's just like glued to their phones. It's like I said,
it's extreme.
Extreme friendship.
You mean you really want to know my name? That's from, of course, Cable Guy. All right, let's go around with our final thoughts on here. Pixel, you're the young 20-something. I know we kind of dominated here tonight, but final thoughts on this film or anything that comes to mind about it?
I'm glad that we all realized that the diner was the friends we made along the way. But
there's my virtual punching stick. well thought out there. That was very thoughtful on your part. Your consideration has a lot of empathy in it.
I think movies like this are important. I do. Movies that highlight friendship, friend groups that can echo reality and put it on a screen. Even today, there are friend groups like this. There are people that are still connected like this. And I think it's important for people to see that.
Wow. You sound like you're in your late 20s rather than your early. I'll give you credit for that.
Yeah, it's a movie where you can watch it and you're craving a roast beef sandwich, and then 10 minutes later, you don't want it because you watched Earl eat all that food.
Pixel, does Rob ever get to see your finger after one of these? Or during one of these?
That too proudly represents to me the first episodes of Mission Impossible. That was not my selection that I covered tonight. If we want to go there, we can do this, sir, publicly.
Wait. Publicly?
Oh, shut up. Shut your mouth.
I thought the Extreme Movie Show was where podcasting was a pleasure. Pixel, that's all I'm going to say.
I am not wearing green.
Yeah, you're certainly seeing it, though. All right, RDV, final thoughts?
Well, I already went over my final thoughts. What'd you ask Eric?
I didn't ask him anything, but now he's going to give his final thoughts.
Your final thoughts.
Well, you've all heard me blather on about how much I like this movie for the last 45 minutes, but a couple of things I wanted to point out. The old man in the TV in the appliance store.
He's better have color.
He went on to be the curmudgeon medical examiner on Homicide, and by that time he was so old he couldn't even lift his head. But if you notice, that guy and left side of the menu Earl were both at the wedding reception. I don't know if you guys caught that.
That's a nice detail.
But and that's what why I think so highly of this movie was that just people it's like, what the hell are they doing there? But I'm sure they probably knew somebody's parents and blah 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 blah. I mean, it was just I don't like the term slice of life because it's used too much in the comic book business now, and usually it's not in a good way. But that's kind of what this was. And to me, it's one of those, you were saying before, like something, this movie, I don't ever remember. I've seen more movies that were made before Diner than after. I don't ever remember this level of conversation throughout a movie prior to this. And I think that might have been something that may have, started to change as a result of a movie like this. Now, it was not a tremendous success.
No,
at the box office. And I don't even know if it's even got a cult status because I don't know how many people even remember this. But I hope anybody that catches this on the replay that hasn't seen it gives it a shot, because I don't think you'll be disappointed. It's 2 hours very well spent.
No more disappointed than that guy at the TV shop who watched Bonanza with his father every single episode in black and white.
I didn't recognize the Ponderosa. I think I'll go look at some TV sets.
I like to say that the Extreme Movie Show is 80s based because that's when I came of age, and I know that RDV you're geeking out over because you're a few episodes in season 1 of Miami Vice and how that was cutting edge at the time. Yep. Again, some things as the eye test, or unless you lived it, it's really hard to communicate that to it. I would say that I would say Diner is an important film of the 80s because it really does change the way that films are potentially done and TV as far as a lot of talking and less action, whereas Mission Impossible was the opposite, which I thought was interesting. But this movie definitely, you knew that back then. And again, with everybody in here maybe not being quite an A-lister at that time, they soon would all go on to be something that's very rare for a film to have that combination of talent and people at that same age and status in the Hollywood world. So again, it's a very good movie. It's excellent, actually. It's not one that I could watch over and over again.
No,
but if you want to know what you want to know what was happening in the 80s, even though this movie's about the late 50s, the 80s had an element of going back a generation that definitely shows up there in Diner. So, great film. Definitely ones that if you're going to watch something from the 80s and you take the 80s seriously, you should, especially if you're younger.
This movie, even though it's done by Hollywood, didn't feel like a Hollywood movie.
Yeah, it's more like an independent film, right?
Yeah, this is a movie you should at least take for those who are not really big on dramas, check out this movie. Sit down, really sit and watch it. It's kind of like The Outsiders. You at least got to watch it once, whether you think you're not going to like it or not. And it said it may surprise you how just relatable this movie is, and he said it's especially for the people in their later years now. It might bring up some old memories, of just friends you knew and friends that you're still around. Just like I said, in this movie. Call up your friend, check them out, see if you can find them, and just ask them how they're doing, because you never know,
And then ask him, "Are you going to finish that?"
Yes. If you're coming over this way, I come over, but if you're going to come over, But I mean, it's like you said, it's one of those movies that it just came out of the left field. You know,
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, just like that right hook.
All right, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Diner from 1982. Check that out here on the Xtreme Movie Show. It's a good film. It's actually, you could almost argue it's a Christmas film because it's around Christmas, but I don't like to say it's a Christmas film
That's the
because
thing we
it
talk
has
about.
nothing to do with it.
That's-
As people like to say on the internet, oh, that just doesn't count. What were you going to say?
I was gonna say we didn't really talk about the scenery, the setting stuff. We always talk about that when we watch
This is a
the
material
film.
of the film.
I love the whole TV scene right there, and at the station, or not the TV station, but the TV store, and just they did decorations on the door, the garland stuff. It's none of this newer Klingon stuff. It's actually just old time, kind of like Christmas kind of decorations.
You
But
know, even
it's-
though Pine Hills is a war zone these days here, just west of Orlando, Florida, there was a time when Santa Claus would come into the Pine Hills Shopping Center that would be adorned after the Boy Scouts parade and the Winter Park parade, and Santa would come early one night with gifts, and he would be helicoptered in. I'm just saying, I remember decorations like that, so just have to throw out there for the locals too.
Same here.
File that away.
I remember that. Then there was a chase in the mall with the Ford truck, and
Oh, and one more thing. Pixel,
One
you're
more
a
thing.
schmuck. Another 5 seconds, you'd have had us for free.
All right, guys. Diner, 1982. Check it out. Have a good night. Remember,
that's sacrilegious.
Good night, kids.
Join us next time for more diners, drive-ins, and dives.
no, we do not promote other people's shit on this channel like that, sir. We do not do that. You know better. That's an instant strike. Good night now.
This was not a Dan Curtis